Thank you for downloading from the BBC. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Hello, welcome to Health Check from the BBC. I'm Claudia Hammond. Sometimes in medicine, it's the simple things that make a difference. Today, why waiting a couple of minutes before cutting the cord of a newborn baby can transform lives.
To do a simple maneuver, such as delaying the clamping of the cord, and in this way decrease significantly the incidence of iron deficiency in infancy, is really worthwhile.
And how to address the high levels of drowning in Lake Victoria. My guest today is Sarah Bosley, health editor of The Guardian newspaper. First today, the fight against cancer. Or is that really the best way of describing it? Patients are often exhorted to beat their cancer bravely, and if it doesn't work and they die, we see obituaries which say they lost their battle against the disease. But not all patients are happy with the idea of using fighting metaphors to describe their experience. In a moment, we'll hear about some new research on the topic. But before that, here's Kate Granger, a doctor from the north of England who was diagnosed with cancer almost 3 years ago and who's been told that she won't survive it. I asked her what sort of things people tend to say to her.
The common attitude is that, oh, you're going to fight this, aren't you? You're going to fight it to the end, and I don't like that language at all. It feels very much like when I lose my fight, which I will, that the blame's been put on me as the patient, and I really don't think that's fair.
There almost seems to be a sense of suggesting that if you're fighting it, that if you don't, you're somehow not trying, doing something wrong. Yeah,
not trying, giving up. I've been very conservative with the treatment of my cancer, and I've stopped chemotherapy regimes early because I felt that the burden was outweighing the benefit, and a lot of people felt that I was giving up, and I was told that I must fight. But in order to preserve my quality of life, I really think that I've done the right thing.
And for you, does it feel like a battle sometimes? Because the things you're going through and putting up with and deciding about might feel like that.
No, I've never viewed it like that. I almost view my cancer and me as a symbiosis. I know it's not, it's more like a parasitic relationship, but we sort of get along together. Some days the cancer gets the upper hand and other days I do, and we sort of muddle along together, and we've learnt to live with each other. I don't battle it because it's not something that I'm ever going to win.
Some people talk about being on a journey. Would you say you're on a journey?
I suppose so. A journey that's going to end in death. But yeah, I suppose it is a journey.
And if people suggest that you're brave, would you agree that you are?
I personally feel that bravery implies a choice. So, a soldier who chooses to go to war and lay down his life for his comrades, that's brave. I haven't had any choice about getting cancer. It's just something that's happened to me. It's unfortunate that it's happened at a young age, but I didn't choose it. So how I deal with it can't be brave.
And what does it make you feel when you see sometimes, I don't know, in the newspapers, you see in obituaries that they talk about people losing their battle with cancer or losing their fight?
I've kind of said, if anyone says she lost her brave fight, when I die I'm going to come back and curse them. Because I don't want to be remembered as a loser. I've had a very successful career, I've achieved a lot with my life, and I don't want to be remembered in that negative way. I'd much rather be remembered in a positive way.
So what do other people think? Eleanor Semino, Professor of Linguistics and English Language at Leicester University in the UK, has interviewed patients, carers and health professionals about the metaphors used when people are dying. This week she's talking about her research at a conference at the Work Foundation in London. I asked her which groups use these so-called fight metaphors the most often.
In our study, we have found that all three groups use violence metaphors, broadly speaking. But among the three groups, the health professionals use them less. And it may be that the health professionals we're looking at are all based in the UK. And in the UK, there is a lot of awareness of the shortcomings and the potential harm that the fight metaphor can do that Kate Granger has talked about. And indeed, every now and again, the health professionals in our data use fight metaphors self-consciously. So the kind of thing that people call a fight, it's as if they might be using scare quotes around the word fight or battle. Interestingly, patients use them to describe a variety of experiences. So most of the time, when we think of fight metaphors for cancer or illness, we are thinking of the patient having to fight the disease. And those metaphors are present in our data. But then there are other metaphors, for example, the disease fighting the patient. Similar metaphors are used for the effects of the treatment on the patient. So people talk about having had a battering from chemo. They refer to chemo as a sledgehammer, for example. And they also use similar metaphors to talk about other aspects of their experiences where we weren't necessarily expecting to find them. So, for example, speaking to health professionals is presented as a battle that they have to prepare for, and having ammunition to bring to the consultation. So there's a whole range of experiences that they talk about in terms of fights and battles.
Did you find that most people liked talking about this in this way, or like Kate, were they not keen on it?
There is plenty of evidence in our study that Kate's experience is quite common. There is evidence in our data of patients for whom the metaphor provides, if you like, a framing that works in a negative way. So one person says, I feel such a failure that I'm not winning this battle. And this is a classic example of how that particular metaphor doesn't work for some people and can do harm. The idea that treatment has been tried, it hasn't been successful, you are now in the terminal phase, and on top of that, you feel that you are failing as if it was your fault. And that is one of the possible negatives of the idea of being ill and trying to get better as a battle.
But some people like them, so it's not the same for everyone.
Yes, and I have to admit that this is a surprise for us, because there are some people in our data who seem to find a sense of meaning, purpose, and identity in being a fighter and being engaged in a fight. So one person describes himself as, I am such a fighter, with a sense of pride. Another person says, my consultants recognized that I was the born fighter. You could still argue that these metaphors, to some extent, are imposed by the culture and the language around people. But these people choose to describe themselves in this way. They're talking to other patients online. They don't have to use them. And we also have some examples of patients who describe themselves as being young and as wanting to fight and win the battle. So the overall finding, if you like, is that different metaphors provide different framings, and different metaphors work in different ways for different people. And the important thing is that people are not having other unsuitable metaphors imposed on them, but they can pick their own, the ones that give them the best quality of life, the best frame of mind to approach their experience.
Are there differences between cultures in different places, do you think, as to around the world how much the whole idea of fight metaphors are used?
Generally speaking, metaphors to do with physical aggression are quite common across the languages of the world, primarily because metaphor is a very basic and fundamental mechanism that we use to talk about a whole range of experiences that might be abstract, complex, sensitive, subjective, invisible, in terms of more physical, concrete experiences. And physical struggle is one of them, not necessarily just war, but just fighting with your body, etc. If we talk specifically about the experience of illness and cancer, there may well be differences across cultures. Some commentators in the United States have pointed out that the use of the fight metaphor, including for terminal illness, including for people who are advanced in age, is imposed on patients in ways that make them feel as though if they don't fight, they're letting people down. And we have had some input in a discussion in the United States where people have commented that possibly the cultural context, but also the presence of private health providers, might encourage the view that you've got to fight as long as there is another treatment you can try, as long as there's another type of medication that might work for you.
Eleanor Semino. Now, Sarah, this leaves doctors in a tricky position, really, because on the one hand, there are some people that like these metaphors. On the other hand, there are people like Kate who really hate it and do not want to be talked to in that way. What can doctors do, do you think?
Well, I think doctors themselves are in a bit of turmoil about this, about exactly how to talk about cancer. And I think perhaps the whole fight metaphor goes back really about 40 years to when Richard Nixon started to talk about the war on cancer in 1971. And that was really a sort of galvanising thing and a fundraising thing as well. But I think it's stayed with us ever since. But doctors themselves are a little concerned about that sort of language now, not least because they don't consider it's necessarily a war they're winning.
So it's, in a sense, it's being used in a broader way as well as the individual battle that a patient might be fighting, if you like. It's used in a wider sense to talk about looking for a cure for cancer.
Yes, but you could see the patients as the troops, if you like. So each one of those is fighting their own battle within this massive war on cancer. You have magic bullets and you have strategies to defeat the cancer and so on. But I think doctors themselves wonder if this is sensible, because an awful lot of people will end up actually living with their cancer.
And it's hard not to use metaphor at all. As a writer who's writing about health all the time, how much do you find yourself thinking about the impact of these metaphors?
I have to say that the fight against cancer and winning their fight against cancer has become a terrible cliche. So I really would struggle not to use that. But it's something that gets used an awful lot in newspapers, particularly in the tabloids and in headlines, more than anything, I guess.
Now, in Professor Semino's research, she found that some people were actually making up their own metaphors for it. One woman saw it in musical terms, that some cells in the body weren't singing in tune with the others. And another man saw cancer as an unwelcome lodger, and a lodger who'd left the house but had kept the key and could come back at any time. It's quite clever the way people have their own ways of conceptualising it.
Yes, I think so. And whatever's helpful to them, obviously. I can understand that some people might well wish to think that they are fighting a battle they're going to win. But if you aren't, and you can get used to this idea that you're going to live with cancer, and some people die with cancer, they die of something else, then that may be a better attitude to take, actually.
Well, Professor Semino is now collecting these metaphors, so if you've thought of a different way of thinking about your experience of life-threatening illness, do email us at healthcheck@bbcworldservice.com, or I'm on Twitter @Claudia Hammond. Each year, a staggering 5,000 people drown in the waters of East Africa's Lake Victoria. This is one of the highest such fatality rates anywhere in the world. And just last month, at least 109 people drowned on Lake Albert in the west of Uganda. Our reporter, Catherine Biaruhanga, visited one organisation taking a new approach to saving lives on the lakes of Uganda.
Along the shores of Lake Victoria and on many of its islands, you find small fishing communities. I'm at Bugonga landing site. The sun is high up in the sky. I can see groups of women and children washing clothes by the shore. The lake is breathtaking. Miles and miles of blue, calm waters as far as the eye can see. But its mood can change at any time, putting these people's lives in danger. Further ahead are a group of fishermen tending to their boats and nets. Together with those who travel on the lake in vessels like ferries, they're most at risk.
When we took off, there was a small waves over the lake, reaching about 5 minutes when we were in the middle. A heavy wave comes that found us in the middle. The waves turned the boat upside down.
Fisherman Moses Adriongi talking about a devastating accident he had when out fishing. 9 of the 16 people on board died. Luckily, he was wearing a life jacket.
Me, I feel bad up to tomorrow.
How do you feel about it because you're still a fisherman?
For me, I feel I have nothing to do in this world. My work is fishing. From that time, I'm still fearing in my heart.
I take a walk with Sarah Namsoke, who's the chairperson for Bugonga landing site. But why do you have this laxity in terms of safety on the lake?
The fishers tend to have a mentality that a person can die at any time. So you talk to them about life jackets. Another one will tell you that it's heavy. I don't feel comfortable while I'm putting it on. Somebody can be even putting a life jacket in the boat without putting it on. He has it, but he puts it in the boat.
It can take hours for help to reach those stranded on the lake. Tim DeVet, co-founder at Safe Waters in Uganda, is passionate about changing this and has been working to improve safety on Lake Victoria and other water bodies for 12 years. He's setting up a command centre to organise possible rescue services like the police and army.
What we would do is receive the phone call, coordinate a response in partnership with government, or deliver the call to the responsible government agency and have them deliver the response. But at the end of the day, the person in distress actually receives help, and that's the objective.
Tim's focus on having a command centre rather than separate organisations carrying out rescues comes from experience.
What we've acknowledged is that running rescue boats is both costly and on occasion imprudent, because without access to decent levels of communication in terms of being able to coordinate an emergency response, and without access to a level of education that would be commensurate with one actually saving a life, you could have the fastest rescue boat in the world, but it really is not going to save that life, you know.
But even with a command centre in place, the government will still need to act. In March, over 100 people died on Lake Albert in western Uganda when a fishing boat they were travelling on capsized. It took over 24 hours for a professional rescue team of police divers to reach them. Abraham Biandala, the Minister of Works and Transport, oversees the country's transport safety.
We don't have a lot of personnel in the rescue. Police is doing some part. We have some little rescue and operation with the airline, CAA, but with water we don't have much. These are areas where we are going to improve to fill up the gaps.
Some people would say that it's taking too long to get any kind of action. Yes, you admit that there are problems, but hundreds of people are dying on these waters.
No, it's not taking too long. You must know where we are coming from. The situation was very, very bad, extremely bad. We are improving it. Some 10 to 15 years, there were hardly a reasonable ferry on the waters of Uganda. Now we have got very many new ones. We are getting them certified by competent companies. We shall also get on the rescue side. You know, we have to move at a pace which is affordable.
Other groups are also trying to help the communities here. One thing people will tell you is that the issue of drowning needs to be talked about if a culture of safety is to spread in Uganda, Tanzania and Kenya, the countries that border the lake.
Catherine Birahanga reporting from Uganda. Now, Sarah, I'd like to ask you about polio, because this week the World Health Organization has declared that the spread of polio is an international public health emergency. Now, this is quite a statement to make, isn't it, when we were making such progress?
It's really depressing. I was quite shocked to hear this. They are talking about an extraordinary event, and what they mean is the international spread of polio. Between January 2012 and the early part of 2013, they'd virtually stopped the international spread of the virus. So what you had were 3 endemic countries, as they say, Afghanistan, Pakistan and Nigeria. And it's still endemic in those 3 countries. The trouble is now that you've got spread from those countries and from a second batch of countries to third batch of countries. So now we're talking about something like 10 countries that actually have got some infections.
And so we've seen an increase in Syria because of the war there, but also Cameroon as well.
It appears to have come probably from Nigeria via Chad, and Cameroon had about 3 cases, I think. And from Cameroon, it's gone to Equatorial Guinea. So suddenly you have this situation where you have countries that were free of it, and you're starting to get the virus moving. And it's moving with adults who are travelling from one country to another. And this is really, really frightening, actually, because we thought we'd closed it all down, you know, except for these 3 large countries that were the, sort of the last pockets and where it has to be rooted out and where there were clearly conflict and deprivation problems. And now you have a whole lot of countries where it should be fairly containable, and yet it isn't.
So what happens next? Is there anything that can be done about it?
Well, the World Health Organization has asked all the countries where we're getting a lot of polio cases actually to ensure that adults travelling out of those countries should be vaccinated. Essentially, they want them to have a dose of polio vaccine before they travel.
So this is actually about the adults rather than the children, which we always hear about.
It is about the adults. It's because the adults appear to be the people who are actually transferring it from one country to another.
Thanks very much, Sarah. You're listening to Health Check from the BBC, and I'm Claudia Hammond. My guest today is Sarah Bosley from The Guardian newspaper. Sometimes in medicine there are simple solutions which can make a real difference to a person's health, and one of those involves newborn babies. When a baby's just been born, a third of their blood is still in the placenta, but if you delay clamping and cutting the cord for just a minute or two after birth, some of that blood will flow into the baby, boosting their iron levels and preventing deficiency. But lots of obstetricians don't do it because the recommended method involves holding the baby down low to allow the blood to flow in, rather than handing it straight over to the mother. But now new research just published in The Lancet overturns this advice and shows it's just as good to give the baby to the mother with the cord still attached. Now, Sarah, before we hear from the author of that research, why is it so important for a baby to have sufficient levels of iron when they're born?
Because the problem is that deficiency of iron can actually cause neurodevelopmental disorders in babies. And it's not uncommon, it seems. Apparently there's iron deficiency in something like 10% of babies in the United States and Western Europe. And obviously that's higher as well in developing countries.
The author of this new research is Professor Nestor from Buenos Aires School of Medicine in Argentina. He joined me from the Paediatric Academic Society's annual meeting in Vancouver, Canada, and explained more about why so many staff don't follow these recommendations.
There may be many reasons, but one of them, and that was the motivation of our study, is that the recommendation says that we should hold the baby during the time that the cord is unclamped, and in order to optimize the amount of blood that goes from the placenta to the infant, it is recommended to hold the baby at the level of the vagina or even below the level of the vagina. So you can imagine in a normal delivery, a 7 or 8 pounds baby, a 3.5 kilo baby, held by an obstetrician at the level of the vagina during 2 minutes is uncomfortable. The baby is slippery, the baby may be crying, the mother wants to hold the baby. So even if the obstetrician may have the intention to wait for a while, the reality is that they don't use a stopwatch or anything like that, and the times get finally shortened and the baby's cord cut, and then the baby is handled to the parents. This is one of the reasons. So what we have done is we have studied the volume of blood that comes from the placenta to the infant, what we call placental transfusion, comparing a group of mother-infant pairs. What we did is in all the babies, after the baby was born, we got a weight with an electronic scale immediately after birth. It usually takes less than 15 seconds to get this first weight. Then half of the infants were held with the unclamped cord at the level of the vagina, and the other half was held by the mother on top of her abdomen or chest, depending mainly on the length of the umbilical cord. And after 2 minutes, we clamped the cord, we cut it, and we weighted baby again in the same scale. And we found that the babies after birth, they gain weight in both groups, and they gained an almost identical amount of weight. They gained 53 grams in one group, 55 grams in the other group, which is equivalent from the statistical point of view. So if now we have demonstrated that it is the same to hold the baby on the mother's abdomen or chest instead of holding the baby at the level of the vagina, we expect that this will increase compliance with the procedure because it is much easier, it is nicer because it enhances maternal-infant bonding, it's much more comfortable for the obstetrician. So we expect that this finding of our study will prompt a better compliance with the procedure.
So why has it been thought for so long that you had to hold the baby at a lower level for the blood to flow in, presumably with the help of gravity?
Well, there were some studies performed like 35 or 40 years ago with a different methodology, not exactly the way the things happen in a delivery in current times. What those investigators did was to hold the babies vertically up all the length of the umbilical cord, which may mean 50 centimeters. And they then weighted the placentas to see how much blood was left in the placenta. And these were small studies with a low number of babies at each position, but they could show that the placenta was emptier when the baby was held at the level of the vagina or below, and was a little fuller with more blood when the baby was held high up in a vertical position. Nobody can imagine now delivering a baby and pulling the baby up above the mother. This is unnatural. This does not occur. So I'm not saying that those studies were wrongly done, but I'm saying that the information given by those studies is not practical, because this is not what occurs in regular deliveries. And in many deliveries, the baby is born, the clamp is cord, and the baby is given to the mother to hold the baby. Well, what we propose is do the same thing, but please do not cut the umbilical cord. It's not necessary. Just give the baby to the mother, wait for 2 or 3 minutes, and then cut it.
Professor Nestor. Sarah, it's interesting how medical procedures change so much, isn't it? Even with just something like what you do with a baby straight after delivery.
Sometimes with hindsight, it seems that the simplest things were perhaps the right ones to do. And certainly they found that with some of the interventions they've tried to teach people in the developing world, for instance, with birth attendants. There's the basic procedure of drying the baby after the baby comes out to stop hypothermia, for instance, and suctioning the mouth with a little rubber bulb just to get out the mucus. They're very basic things, and it's clearing the airways, keeping the baby warm, and that helps save lives.
So sometimes it's those straightforward things that can make all the difference. That's it for this week's Health Check from the BBC. Thank you to Sarah Bosley for being my guest today. The producer was Helena Selby, and I'm Claudia Hammond. Next week, how there are so many bells and buzzers going off in hospital that doctors can get alarm fatigue. Do join me then.
There are dozens of different podcasts now available from the BBC, including news, documentaries, science, business, arts and sport. For details of them all, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.